Next up is, let's say we want to take our activity types here, which are a 2-letter SAP code, a dash, and then a number. And we want to break this out into 2 separate columns. We want one column with just those 2 letters, and then another column with just the numbers. This is where we can leverage the text to columns tool. So to demonstrate this here, the first thing I'm going to do is highlight the text that we want to split out into multiple columns. And now in this example, we're only going to be splitting it into 2 columns, but I did want to point out you can split things into multiple columns depending on how your data is set up. So now with the data highlighted that we want to go ahead and split, we can then come up on our data ribbon. And over here in the data tools segment, which by the way is my favorite segment of them all, if you're ever just, exploring Excel and you want to check out different tools, that is where all my favorite tools are housed. And I'm going to click on this text to columns button. And when you click on this, it will bring up the text to columns wizard. So this wizard is going to help us walk through these different steps in order to get our text separated. And now the first thing it's asking us is to fill in one of these bubbles. This bottom one here is fixed width. So that would be if there's a certain number of characters in between each set that we want to tell Excel to break it out. So let's say every 5th character, you want it to be a new column and your data set up like that, you can select that option. However, in our case here, we have a delimiter that is telling Excel where to break things out. And delimiter is essentially the fancy way of saying there's a character, a symbol, a space, a dash, something that Excel can look at and be like, oh, that's where I break the text into another column. So here I'm going to leave delimiter checked because remember how our data is set up down here. We have the 2 letters, a dash, and then the number. So we know every time there's a dash, that's where we want it to be broken out. And now if I click on our next button here, we have all these different delimiters to choose from. And some of these are baked in for us, some commonly used ones. However, in our case, we're going to uncheck tab and check on other. And now I want you to keep an eye on the data preview down here. And when I type in the dash, which is what we want for our other, as you can see, it shows us a little snapshot here of what it plans to do with our data. So this is a great way to kind of get a little sneak peek to see if what you set up was correct. And now I'm just going to click on finish here, and Excel is going to tell us, hey, we see there's data in this column. Do you want to replace it? And in this case, we do, right? Because we want this column to be the activity type, so that 2-letter code, and then the invoice column here in F. So I'm going to click on OK, and that will go ahead and break out our data into those 2 separate columns in seconds. So that's a great one to remember if you ever get, for example, a CSV file. So those are, those files that are the comma separated value files, where it essentially takes all your data, sometimes from like a database, and it jams it all into one column separated by commas. And you want to break those back out into columns. This is a great one to remember, and you can use that comma as your delimiter when you're working in the wizard. So you know how we used the dash before, you can use a comma there instead if you're working with a CSV file and you want it to be a little more user Excel friendly. And then over here we have the removing duplicate section. So let's say we want to know how many different activity types are there? Are there, 5 on our list? Are there 20 on our list? Scrolling down here, it's kind of difficult for this data to tell a story. And that's something to keep in mind with big data across the board. We're just getting more and more and more data nowadays, and it's really important to have that data still tell a story. So if you looked at all these activity types, you wouldn't be able to be like, okay, RV is 22%. You're just looking at all these different instances. It's tough to even tell how many there are. So this is one way to take a look at this. So let's say we want to remove any duplicate SAP codes and we just want to see one instance of each to see really how many there are. What I'm going to do is first highlight and copy paste them by doing Control C and Control V on my keyboard to move them into our column G here. And now I'm going to have all of these highlighted. And on our data ribbon, we have this middle button here with the little X on it. And that is our remove duplicates button. And when we click on this, Excel's gonna say, hey, I noticed you only highlighted one column. Did you mean to do that? And in this case, this particular workbook is meant for this. So we're going to go ahead and click continue with the current selection. However, full disclosure, I did want to point out that if you are working with a large workbook and think about it like logically, if you removed duplicates in only one column, that's going to shift all that data up, which may misalign your rows. So that's something to keep in mind depending on how your data is set up. In our case here though, this workbook's set up for this, so I'm going to click continue with the current selection and click on remove duplicates, and Excel's gonna confirm again, hey, did you mean to highlight column DZ? It asks if your data has a header. So in this case, I didn't highlight that little SAP code header over here in our row 12. So I'm going to uncheck that and click OK. And now Excel will tell us there were 93 values removed and 6 unique values remain. So now we can see that out of that whole long list of activity types, there were 6 different ones here that we were working with. Another use for removing duplicates is maybe you have some data that was manually entered and someone may have accidentally put the same person twice on a list and you want to remove one of those instances. You can go ahead there and remove any of the duplicates using that tool. And now lastly here, I did want to demonstrate another one that I love, which is the rand function. So what the rand function will do is it will insert a random number in your cell between 0 and 1. And if you're like, yeah, I've got enough numbers going on, why would I want to put a random number in my data set? There are some different uses for this. So one use for the rand function is, I actually use this back in corporate quite a bit, is if we were doing some form of audit where we needed a completely random sample selection, instead of going through the 10,000 different rows and scrolling down and being like, okay, copy paste 1, scroll down a bunch, copy paste 2, maybe I needed to pull 100 samples. That could take a long time. So what I would do is put a rand function next to each of those data points that would generate this completely random number next to each row. And then you copy and paste those into place, because as you'll see soon, every time you click, that formula will keep regenerating. And then you can sort it by that column. And what it will do is mix up all of the different rows so you can easily come in and copy paste as many as you need without having to do it from all different places in the data set. And just to show you how this works, you type equals rand, and it's honestly the easiest function ever. There are no arguments. You just open and close your parentheses, and that will generate a random number. And now, as I mentioned before, I did want to point out, every time you do something somewhere else, let's say I type hi over here, watch this number, it's going to keep regenerating. So this is where I will typically go in and copy it and paste them as a value, so that way your computer won't be making those lovely airplane noises that we all know and love. And now,